The Qatar GP is here, and let's talk about what every single team is bringing here, because now we have the pictures and I can update you guys on what to expect with every team. If you guys enjoy these videos, I would really love if you guys actually subscribed. If you haven't, please do. It means the world for me, and leave a like on the video. That'd mean a lot. Let's get into the upgrades. Obviously, high and medium speed corners is the emphasis here. So let's get into the first thing about Qatar and how they changed up the DRS zone. So last year, the DRS zone detection was a little bit closer and the DRS activation was a little bit closer, but now they changed it up and made the DRS detection a little bit further, but the DRS activation a little bit closer. So a longer DRS zone, the actual opposite of what we've been getting in 2023. So this should promote better overtakes. Turn 1 is going to be the main part where people overtake anyways, and another effect on DRS being just that much more important here, which will be talked about later with a certain team that has a big DRS advantage. Also, another thing I wanted to note before getting into all the upgrades for the teams is that the track has been resurfaced. We've seen this on a couple of tracks now, and it is important to note because there are no other like F2 and like the F1 Academy. Nobody is driving here. It will just be Formula 1. So that means that tires will probably get shredded up here quickly, but grip will be a bit tricky. As you can see, like all the dust that comes from it being in the desert, and it can be a tricky circuit when it comes to finding grip, but also the tires getting shredded. Let's talk about the rear wings. We got Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes, and Alpine. And looking here, they aren't fully maxed out wings. I mean, the Red Bull is pretty maxed out. It's got the gurney flap on the top. So does Ferrari. Mercedes does have a very slight one, and with Alpine, I can't really tell. It does look like they kind of have it, but every team is running a gurney flap, pretty high downforce. Obviously, on this type of track, with it being super hot, tires are really important to preserve. Red Bull is looking to have a huge DRS advantage. I mean, if you look like at the upper plane, there's even like a little part added to the second part of that actual rear wing to making it even more downforce, but also even more effective on its DRS. It's gonna be a tricky car to beat here. Even with McLaren looking very strong, this squad is going to be super, super feisty. Perez is looking to have a great race. I hope he does have one. It's been a minute for him. And we're probably going to have a 3-time champion on Saturday. Even looking at this, another thing to note though is this is the rear wing from Singapore, the one that they struggled to find the setup with. Some issues were occurring, so maybe that happens today. I don't think so. There are pretty big curbs here, but they aren't set up in the way that Singapore is. Singapore's pretty flat. This circuit is flat-ish, but the curbs themselves don't actually play an effect like they do in Singapore. In Singapore, you're taking those curbs over them to gain more speed and slow speed. Here, you're just using them as more of a real runoff when you're going into the high speed and medium speed. It won't affect the car as much. They still won't be able to lower it to their usual amount, but the car should still be pretty strong here. Every wing here, with the exception of Ferrari, has that little cutout in the back, as you can see with Mercedes. Every team has high downforce. Now let's talk about the other 4 teams that I want to get into, which is McLaren, Alfa Romeo, Aston Martin, and Haas. Haas still doesn't have the cutout, just slightly they have it, but not to the extent that Aston Martin has it. Alfa has it, and so does McLaren. McLaren should be pretty strong here, but yet again, emphasis is on max downforce. Even though these teams aren't running a fully maxed downforce wing, it's not like Monaco spec. It's pretty close, but it's not there as of yet. One thing I wanted to note was for Aston Martin, they're running 2 specs. They usually run 2 specs. One's without the gurney flap, the other one is with. They also had a picture out there with like the wing from way before, like in Bahrain. That was also being looked at to be ran. So I wonder what they're going to go here with. It really depends on what their car is feeling. Honestly, in the setup, if we look at simulator times now, this isn't the most accurate statement, but it has Aston Martin in 7th, has Alpine all the way in 10th. I don't actually believe this to be true. Alpha Tauri is all the way up here. I don't actually think this is going to be the case. He's ran these like simulator tests a couple of times now and has gone off of like other Grand Prix and so on, and they haven't been very accurate as of yet. They said a Mercedes was going to be like 4th in Singapore, and that Aston Martin was going to be 5th, even though Aston Martin was pretty quick in Singapore with the exception of the damage. Mercedes was the fastest car in Singapore. They had McLaren ahead of Ferrari, even though Ferrari was the fast car. So it's not the most accurate thing. They had Red Bull #1 in Singapore. So it's not the most accurate thing when it comes to these simulation real statements. Another picture I wanted to show you was of this rear wing of the Aston Martin, showing you that little cutout that they have. it does look very similar to their Monaco spec wing, I must say. I think they've added a couple of additions to it, but nothing to really call it a massive upgrade. And also talking about Red Bull not having their usual beam wing setup, they have a different setup for this Grand Prix because of the high downforce, and running that different, like I said, this Singapore setup that kind of had them guessing, you know? So let's see what happens on the setup. I think they'll be fine here, but yes, they do have a different beam wing running here, not their usual one beam wing, which Ferrari does have. I will note that. This Grand Prix is going to be blazing hot. So with McLaren, with Ferrari, with Red Bull, all the pictures that you're seeing here, now the pictures aren't really out for Aston Martin. There is a picture from Mercedes that I want to talk about that they've been changing up on the car for this Grand Prix. It is cooling gills, which is one of my favorite things on an F1 car. I think it looks super aggressive and sick, but it doesn't add performance. It adds engine cooling, and depending on how you put the internal parts, sometimes they have this run through the side pod, so the side pod has it ran through to the cooling gills and has the air come out that way. That is why you see them put in specific spots. Yes, to cool the engine, but also to come out from the backside, giving that hot air effect and giving it more straight line speed. For McLaren's case, they have it on the engine cover predominantly. It is kind of swayed into their side pod design, so I'm assuming that it goes through the side pod inlet to get out to here. When we look at Red Bull, theirs is very much focused on the engine cover. We do know that their side pod inlet goes towards the back of the car, so I'm assuming that this engine cooling, which is usually covered up completely for Red Bull because they're so reliable, is predominantly there to cool the engine and give them more reliability. They haven't really had issues with this. I don't expect any team really to have issues here. Maybe Ferrari is a team to look out for. I mean, when you look at them, they have the super aggressive cooling on the back of their car that actually comes from that S-duct that they have as well. So it will be interesting to note how the team forms here in a super hot track. Especially, let's look at their tire wear here, because tire wear will be a key contributing factor. They have been very good lately, especially like in Japan. They actually blew my expectations, so I expect them to be strong here, but this is a very, very important Grand Prix for them when it comes to the future of the car with that new floor they have added. Will the car perform the same here? Here's another picture of like the inlets for McLaren, showing you that they have continuously changed these inlets. Before, very Aston Martin-like when we saw it back in Austria. Now that they've changed it again, it's a little more similar to what they had in the beginning of the year for the MCL60, but still keeping that small-ish Red Bull style of inlet. And you can see how awesome their undercut is from here as well. Like the car, aggressively mean, looks nice. I love this picture and I wanted to point this out with their actual cooling inlets. There's a picture showing you also that on the McLaren front wing, there is also a gurney flap here out into the front, going for that max downforce. You see the gurney flap back in the rear of the car. This is how the car is going to look like for the race. Keep this in mind with also the cooling inlets, but it could be a change from practice one to qualifying because practice one is going to be blazing. Quali will also be hot, and so will the sprint shootout, but for the actual sprint race and the race, it will be very hot, but it might not be the hottest like it was in Singapore. It'll be close. It'll be very close when it comes to how hot it will be at this Grand Prix. Last, let's talk about Mercedes. So what do they have for their cooling? Because they have that weird little setup with their car to where it looks different. They've been bringing these engine covers that are different on the car. For what they're going to do for their cooling, as you know, and as you've looked into the back of those louvers and really the shoulders on that engine cover, they have now a smaller engine cover top. So the back of the car is gonna be more focused on cooling the engine, but also shredding a bit of drag. This Grand Prix is gonna be a bit tough for them. They do have cooling louvers on their side pods as well on the top of them, which is interesting to most other teams. And why is this? Because obviously the team had that no side pod design, so their cooling is done in a different type of way. And we talked about the whole entire engine reliability being an issue for them. Everything is very weird on the car, let's be honest. So they have to improvise with their cooling and also where they're setting it up, not making it as effective. I guess this is promising for Mercedes in the long run, but as of right now, it doesn't put them in a good spot when the Grand Prix are super hot. They are good on their tires, but it looks like McLaren and Ferrari have figured out a trick. So we'll have to see where Mercedes sits at this point. Thank you all so much for watching. Please leave a like, subscribe, it'd mean the world, and peace.